Okay. I'd like to introduce Jane Flewellen, who is one of our more recent art members. And I'm going to read a little bit of her biography and then a little bit of her art statement. Jane Flewellen grew up near New York City, and its museums exposed her to the great art. Her superb high school art teacher provided challenging college-level instruction. Jane studied fine arts at the University of Michigan, concentrating on drawing, painting, and art history. She is a graduate of the Ohio State University. Jane's award-winning paintings have been juried into the Ohio State Fair in the professional division, the Zanesville Museum of Art, Brindle Art, and numerous other exhibits in Ohio, Indiana, and Virginia. Her works have been in solo, two-person, and invitational exhibits, including a solo exhibition at the Ohio State University Faculty Club. Her work was selected by the Ohio Percent for Art program, which provides funds for the acquisition, commissioning, and installation of works of art for new or renovated public buildings. And I asked Jane a little bit about that. She might be able to share more about it in her talk. She is also represented by Sharon Weiss Gallery in the Short North District of Columbus, Ohio. Jane is not only a member of the National League of American Penwomen as an active art member, but also in the Ohio Art League, Collage of Women Artists, the Worthington Art League, and the Peggy R. McConnell Arts of the, oh, and you must be a member of the Peggy R. McConnell Arts Center in Worthington. And her artist statement goes as follows. I paint because I love beauty and light. We all experience pain and suffering in life, yet we can find respite and joy in beauty. I typically see more beauty in nature than in human-made objects. Nuances of color and the interplay of shapes and values are intriguing. Inspiration comes when something remarkable catches my eye. It is just asking to be painted. Light and reflections are fascinating, especially those in glass. I'm often drawn to subjects with the dramatic contrast of light and dark. For me, light beyond darkness symbolizes hope. My oil paintings capture these unique moments of beauty and light to share with others. Having grown up in the densely wooded hills of New York, I'm drawn to landscapes, trees, and clouds. Often painting for my own photographs, I am also exploring the challenge of painting from direct observation of still lifes, figures, and the outdoors. Jane's paintings are filled with amazing light and emotion, says Sharon Weiss of the Sharon Weiss Gallery. Her lovely landscapes take the observer to a mindful and spiritual place. So I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to Jane because she has a really wonderful presentation for us. So go ahead, Jane.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you being here. So I'm going to share my screen and start my PowerPoint. So the reason why I call this Beauty and Light is I think for my intro that Bev did, is I've thought about my artist statement and why I paint. It's because I love beauty and I love light. I grew up in Chappaqua, New York. I've got my pointer here, and it's about an hour north of New York City by train. And I was exposed to great art through school field trips that we would take to the Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum. So I was exposed to great art and culture. So Chappaqua is in Westchester County. It's the first county north of New York City. And this is a photo, and if you can see how there's trees everywhere. I was just surrounded by trees and hills. And so I think you'll see, as you see my paintings, that I painted a lot of trees. So it's just an example of how our beginning experiences can be really formative for us. So in my talk, I'm going to talk about several people, artists who were big mentors and influences in my life. And the first one is Ellen Lyons. And she was my high school art teacher, and she was probably one of the best teachers I've ever had in my whole life. And she's a graduate of Pratt Institute in New York City. And at the time, that was one of the best art schools in the country. And so she taught us a lot about principles of design and what makes art a good piece of art in terms of design and composition. And she taught us to look very, very carefully. And if we were drawing, she'd say, draw what you see, look carefully what you really see, not what you think you see. And she had very high standards for us and believed that we could reach them. And I think I only got one A from her in my assignments. And her praise did not come easily, but when it came, it just meant the world to me. And she was such a good teacher that at that time, Rhode Island School of Design was one of the best colleges in the country. And normally, maybe one student a year from a high school would get accepted to Rhode Island School of Design. And she had a reputation in their admissions department, Ellen did. And so the year I graduated, 6 people were accepted into Rhode Island School of Design. So that just is a reflection of what a good teacher she was. But my parents, they didn't want me to go to just an art college. They wanted me to get a liberal arts education. Maybe they didn't think I could make a living as an artist. As we all know, that's a struggle. So I looked at normal colleges that had fine arts programs, and I selected the University of Michigan. And so my portfolio included some things like this. And so I was accepted the University of Michigan, and it had a really good reputation in fine arts. So I pursued a fine arts major. But the professors there were really different than Ellen Lyons, my high school art teacher. They were more about expressing yourself and just art concepts. So I didn't feel like they had as high standards as Ellen did. A really pivotal event in my life was my older brother, Larry, developed multiple sclerosis when he was 24. And by the time he was 26, he was in a nursing home, bedridden, blind, paralyzed, and emaciated. And his decline and illness had a huge impact on me and my family. And I was just basically grieving very deeply. And I just sort of lost the drive to make art. And I thought it was just that I wasn't really an artist. And so after my sophomore year, my dad said, "You don't seem that interested in college." And I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Why don't you drop out?" And then I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And my whole life had been geared towards going to college, getting a degree. So I had no idea what I was going to do. And one of my friends, Debbie, she said, "Well, let's go to Europe." So we went to Europe. I bought a plane ticket that was good for a year. And this is of Lake Geneva. And you can see the mountains in the background are called the Dent du Midi Mountains. And we ended up going to this Christian community nearby, and they celebrated the arts. Art was very important. And so I ended up staying there a year, and it was a really wonderful time in my life. But after a year, I decided I needed to come back to the States. And so I came back to school, and I didn't know what I wanted to major in, had no idea. But because I didn't think I had the drive to be an artist, I ended up being a social science major. And my dad said, "Just get a degree." And so my last quarter, I took a computer programming class. And I thought, oh, I can do this. So I got a job at Chemical Abstract Service in Columbus as a computer programmer. And after I had my first child, I switched to technical writing, which was actually a better match for me than computer programming. And so for the next 40 years, I didn't do a lot of art. My life was, raising the boys, divorced, and then got remarried to Jim. And I did some occasional drawing. I'm sorry, I apologize. Some of these photographs aren't the best. And I like to draw people, This is of Joan Baez from one of her albums. And then in 2006, I heard that Columbus College of Art and Design had continuing ed classes. So I thought, I want to start doing some color. So I took an acrylics oil painting class. And if any of you have ever done that, the professor set up these still lifes. And so that was one of my still lifes. And then in 2012, I retired and I thought, what am I going to do now? And I was telling at a staff lunch, I was telling somebody about my journey of being in art school and then dropping out and going to Europe. And he said, are you doing anything with your art now? And all of a sudden it just like hit me, now's the time to go back to art and start developing this gift that I've pretty much neglected for 40 years. So then I found another CCAD continuing ed class. And I took, this was an oil painting class with Brent Payne. And then, so I started setting up still lifes at home. These were some fake fruits and vegetables that I bought. And you can see, like a lot of beginning painters, I didn't have a lot of color variety within an object. So I did a bunch of these still lifes. And then I found this, I really liked glass. That was starting to interest me. And then from the library, there was this botanical book of like flower portraits. So I started painting these flowers that I really liked. And so I really wanted to find another teacher for my painting classes. And in 2013, I heard about McConnell Art Center in Worthington, where I live. And there was this teacher named Stephen Walker. And Stephen Walker, I took classes with him for about 1.5 years every quarter. And Stephen is a very gifted painter. He's very prolific. He makes a living as an artist. He's in 8 galleries around the country. And as you can see, Stephen is very, very good at depicting light. And he painted a lot of landscapes and trees, and he's very detail-oriented, but he's a very fast painter. And so when I started painting with him, I had a book of landscapes from a photography book. So I painted from this book. I found reference photos that I liked and painted these landscapes. My son, Brian, asked me if I would paint this Monument Valley from one of the photographs in the book. So I did this for Brian, my son. This is another one. And then I was really excited. This one of my fellow students saw this painting and she really, really liked it. And so she bought it. And that was just, it was the first painting that I sold, and it meant a lot to me. And when I took it in for her to look at, I said, well, it's sort of dark. You might want to hang it in a really, brightly lit place in your house. And Stephen took me aside and said, are you trying to talk her out of buying your painting? Anyway, so that was my first sale. But then Stephen said that it's really better to paint from your own photographs, because if you're using someone else's photograph, there's copyright issues. So I started painting from photographs that we took on vacations to Canada and Scotland. So this is from a Canadian national park. And my other son, Ben, said, well, Mom, you did a painting for Brian. I want you to do one for me. So he picked out the photo and I did this painting for him. And then I'd seen these at a botanical garden. And again, I really loved light and nature. And so Stephen really influenced me in terms of the light. And this is one of Stephen's reference photos that he let me paint from. And this is another painting that I sold to a couple at an Inniswood Metro Garden exhibit. And so I'm a very slow painter. I'm a detailed painter. And I think Stephen's influence, I'm a perfectionist and slow. And so, Stephen, it would take him maybe 3 weeks before he would say he thought one of my paintings was done. So I think it just, his influence sort of fed into my detailedness. But this was also from a photo that my husband took in Scotland. This is called the mountains are called the Three Sisters. And I like to go to Metro Park. So this is from Sharon Woods. And I painted this tree probably 3 or 4 times. And this is a cloud painting. I was driving out and doing errands one day. And on the way home, I just had to pull over and take a photo of this sunset. I just thought it was gorgeous. Now, one thing I'll say about Stephen, more than any other painting teacher I've had in Columbus, he really wanted to mentor his students and help us to grow in our career. So he encouraged us to enter like some art exhibits in Sydney, Ohio, Piqua, Ohio, and he would enter them too. And he was so generous, he would drive our paintings and deliver them to the exhibit. And when it was over, he'd pick them up and bring them home. And then he recommended my friend Audrey Moody and I to have a 2-person show at Inniswood Metro Garden because he'd had one before. So I was just really thrilled. Another significant thing in my life with my son, Eric, he died by suicide in 2007. And in 2013, about 6 years later, I felt like I'd have enough healing from my grief that I wanted to do a portrait of him. So I painted this portrait, and it was just kind of a way of loving him while I was painting it. And Stephen, he didn't give compliments very often, but he said that it's really good. He says, people are going to hate you. And I was like, why are they going to hate me? And he said, because that's like one of your first portraits, and it's really good. So by now I'd been painting seriously for about 2.5 years. And I really, really wanted to get into a gallery. But I continued on painting light landscapes. This is that Sharon Woods tree again. And I repainted that Three Sisters. I wanted to add a little more color than in the last one. So by now I asked Stephen, do you think I'm ready to approach Sharon Weiss Gallery and show her some of my work? And he said, yeah, I think you're ready, you're good enough. So I picked 6 paintings that I was going to go and show her. And this one, I was like, I don't know if it's good enough. And so I took 6 paintings to her, and this was the one she picked that she wanted to show in her gallery. So this is Sharon in her gallery. It's a lovely gallery. And so in October 2015, she took my painting, and then the next spring she sold it. She said, well, bring in some more paints. So then when one would sell, she'd ask me to bring in more. So she and I had this about 1.5-year courtship process where I would visit her every month and check in. I would go to all her monthly gallery exhibit receptions. And after about 1.5 years, she finally said, you're ready to be one of my official artists. And Sharon has this glass stand where she has all of her artists' last name on there. So I was just finally thrilled when I was on the glass, and you can see my last name, Flewellen, is here. So that, for me, that was a major accomplishment. So then, I continued to do, this is another Sharon Woods landscape I did. This was when I was walking along the bike path along the Olentangy River one day. This was a small study. This is from Jim and I spent vacation in Tuscany. And then one day on the way home from McConnell Arts Center, the sunset was great. I was driving home and I had to pull over and take a bunch of photographs because I love this view. And then, much to my dismay, Stephen Walker moved to Georgia. He followed his wife. She got another teaching job there. And I'm thinking, well, now who am I going to take classes from? And so I decided I'd heard about this guy, Joe Lombardo. And Joe Lombardo teaches a lot of classes at the Cultural Arts Center. He teaches at McConnell. And I think Joe is the best teacher that I've taken from in Columbus. He knows how to articulate art principles on how to paint. And he has a lot of memorable sayings that just kind of stick in your mind. And Joe also offers these plein air classes where you paint outdoors, you go around to different Columbus metro parks. And I found plein air painting was a whole different thing for me. Being a slow painter, trying to do a painting in 2-3 hours was really, really challenging. And the first time I took his plein air class, I think it was cloudy every day, but one. It was cold, and there's overcast light, and sometimes the light comes and goes. Within a few minutes, the sun will be out, then it'll go away. And in plein air painting, as the sun moves across the sky, so do the shadows. So I found it very, very difficult to do plein air and to paint a painting I was happy with in 2 or 3 hours. So again, this is a cloudy day painting. So plein air was just really difficult for me. So I continued to paint from my own reference photographs. This is a larger version of a smaller painting that I wanted to do. Here's a larger version of another smaller one. And as you can see, I like clouds. This cloud was very important to me. After my son Eric died, we put in a memorial bench at the Griggs Frisbee golf course. And that every year I would go visit Eric's memorial bench in honor of him on the anniversary of his death. And one year, this immense cloud was on the horizon. And these are large trees. And so I called this cumulus presence, like Eric's presence was there with me that day. And again, I did more Metro Park paintings. Again, this is that orange tree. This is the third time I painted it. A friend of mine in high school had posted this gorgeous photograph on Facebook, and I asked her permission to paint it, again, because I really liked the light. Again, this is that cloud I was telling you about. I painted it from another vantage point. I call this dramatic presence. And then this was a little study that I did from Inniswood Metro Gardens. And that was a larger, more finished version of the painting. This is another Sharon Woods tree. So I now found another mentor, Fred Fochman. He teaches at McConnell Arts Center, and every time he teaches, it's the same class. And I think I've taken this class 6 times. And Fred is a big believer in painting from direct observation, not from photos. So Fred would set up still lifes. And the first week, you're only allowed to paint with 3 colors: brown, blue, and white, because he wanted you to study the values. So Fred would set up these still lifes of light bulbs, boxes. In later weeks, you could add more color, and he, would bring in a chair for us to paint. He'd set up, still lifes with bottles and duct tape. And this is an upper view of a plaster cast of a newborn baby head. And the baby head is notoriously difficult to paint. So I was pretty proud. This was my best attempt at doing the baby head. And later on during the class, as the weeks went on, he would let us paint around the building. And this is by the elevators on the second floor, looking down into the lobby out onto the tennis courts at the Worthington High School. And I think I painted this 3 or 4 times. But Fred was really good at having you not think any mark in your painting was precious. You need to be willing to scrape off and not get too attached to any part of your painting. And one thing Fred offered were critiques at the end of the class where we would talk about each student's painting. And I found I learned a lot from looking at other people's work and analyzing it. And I will say in 2015, I reconnected with Ellen Lyons. This is my high school art teacher. Jim and I went out. She lives in British Columbia in Canada. And Ellen and I have become friends. We've seen each other for the last 5 years in person. Either we go see her in Canada or she comes here. And as you know, her opinion means so much to me. And as I've shown her my work, she said she is so proud of me and so proud of how far that I've come. And that just means the world to me, that she thinks that my art is good. And I was so happy she wanted to buy one of my paintings. So she bought this Three Sisters painting. And as I talked to her about when I dropped out of art school, that I just didn't think I had the drive to do art, she said, Jane, don't you think maybe your grieving over your brother could have played a part in that? And I'd never thought about that. I just thought I just didn't have the drive be an artist. So after being around Ellen and Fred, I developed a real quandary. Is it better to paint from direct observation or from reference photos? So Stephen Walker, Joe Lombardo, they often painted from photos, but Fred and Ellen really thought direct observation was better. Your eyes can see more color in real life than on a photo, and photos flatten out space. So I really wrestled with that for a long time. It was a real quandary, but over time I started trying to paint at home. This was some flowers on my kitchen table. On my kitchen counter, the light in the morning coming through the window is beautiful. So I really like to paint things on this kitchen counter. I enjoy reflections. So these were just quicker paintings. And then I heard at McConnell Arts Center, they used to be on Wednesday nights, they would hire models and you could come in for 2 hours and paint a model. And so this is a 2-hour painting and I really wasn't that happy with it. So I would get the models permission to take their photograph so I could go home and finish a painting at home to my liking. So these are more the kind of portraits that I would finish, or figures, when I had more time at home to work on them. This is my favorite one. This got in the Ohio State Fair. Matt. One time Sharon Weiss had a show of her artists where we were all supposed to do a self-portrait. And this is my self-portrait. And somebody said, you look like you're glowering. But I said, well, this is what it's like when I'm concentrating and, painting. Painting is a lot of hard work and concentration. This is Yanni. And one time, one of the models didn't show up. So one of the artists, Tim, sat in for us. So I titled this Tim Sitting In. And still, I continued to paint from my reference photos. This is from when we were in Maine. This is from one of the metro parks in town. And again, that cloud, the presence. Sharon Weiss had seen my smaller version. She says, I think you ought to do a larger version of that little cloud painting. And so this was a larger one that I was real happy with. And then I started getting into more and more exhibitions. I started in non-juried ones where anybody could get in. And then after a while, I started applying to jury exhibitions where a juror from a selection of entries, they'll pick the works that they want to put in a show. And I got in, as I said, to Inniswood Metro Gardens, Ohio Art League shows, Brindle Art in Granville. And Sharon Weiss said the Ohio State Fair and Zanesville Museum of Art are really prestigious ones to get in. And I was really grateful to get in there. And eventually I started getting invitations to exhibits. Audrey and I got invited back for another show at Inniswood, and Joe Lombardo had a show of some of his students and he invited certain ones. And I was in an Ohio artist show in Lancaster. McConnell had a couple of invitational exhibits. And then the Addiction Study Institute conference had an exhibit at the Columbus Convention Center. So I was really pleased to get in there. And then my church, Vineyard Columbus, invited me to do a solo exhibition. Now, one thing I will say about an artist with jurors, I found that it took me a while to learn how to handle rejection when my work didn't get into a show. And I don't know if you remember, there was this Wild World of Sports TV show where they would show this skier who would be crashing, and it was the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And so for a long time, I thought if I didn't get an exhibit, then that meant my work wasn't good. And then more and more people would say, you know, it's just that juror's opinion. A friend confided to me, she said, I think if I get into an exhibit, that means the juror wasn't that picky. If I get in, the juror's not that picky, but if I don't get in, that means my art isn't good. So I find it's helpful when I can talk with other artists who struggle with the process of art and insecurity about our work. And the former director of the Rife Gallery told me as a juror that it might just depend on her mood that day, what she picks. So she said I could pick one show on a Monday, and then if I looked at those same entries on Friday, I might pick a totally different show. And so now I know that my favorite painting that I've ever painted, that didn't get into a show one time. And I knew that's a good painting. That was just that juror's opinion. So that's kind of a sort of a step forward for me to start to have some more confidence in what I think is really good in my art. But I have a perfectionistic personality. I struggle with fear of failure. I think a lot of us artists do. Many of us have confessed to each other, you know, we procrastinate and sometimes don't paint because we're really afraid of failure. So over the years, I've just vacillated between sometimes being insecure about my work and sometimes having confidence in my work. And I've noticed sometimes I'll do a painting and I'll think it's horrible. And then a few days later or a few months later, I'll look at it and I'll think, oh, that wasn't so bad. So I found when we're actually working on a painting, it's easy to lose perspective about it. Now, I heard about this Ohio Percent for Art program where the Ohio legislature decided that any public or renovated building where the budget was over $4 million, they had to spend 1% of the budget on art. And so through the Ohio Arts Council, there's this Ohio Percent for Art program where you can apply. And I heard about this Stark State College. They were doing a branch in Akron, and they were having a call for to apply to enter your art. And my works were only 12 by 16 inches. They were relatively small. So I emailed the director, Kathy Signorino, and said, is my art too small? And she said, no, please enter. So I was absolutely thrilled that out of 685 pieces entered, they selected 23, and that this was one of them. So I was just thrilled. And when they had the opening day for the new building, they invited artists to come. And I found my painting and I was just thrilled to see they have a little silver plaque next to it with, the painting title and medium and then my name and that I'm from Worthington. So over time, as I've had to, I've said before, as I had to decide why do I paint and do an artist statement, I realized even more and more, I love beauty and I love light. And I found with my brother Larry's suffering, my own struggles with major depression, and my son Eric's addiction and mental illness and suicide, that for me, light symbolizes healing and hope. So even though I've had a lot of struggles and pain in my life, I can find joy and respite in beauty. And so that's why I call my talk today Beauty and Light. So I still paint from my own reference photos. This is Otter Cove in Maine. And I still did some direct observation, some still lifes. This was from a high school friend's photo on Facebook. I asked her if I could paint it. And this was some orchids in my house. This is from doing a day trip down towards Lancaster. And as I mentioned before, my kitchen counter, when the sun comes in the morning, it's just beautiful light on the counter. So one day I ran and I set up these teal velvet pillows on the counter and as a backdrop, and I got this green base and fruit, and I set them up in different scenarios and took a lot of photos because the light was great. And I decided to title it as though this is a series about human relationships. So this one is called Shy in the Shadows. There are these two fruit on the right-hand side, it's like they're friends. And there's this other little one that's shy in the background. This one I called Strongly Divided. I think it's apt for how divided our country's been the last few years politically. There's a lot of division, and that tension of the fruit against the vase, kind of really represents that tension and division. I call this one the lecture, kind of thinking about a parent lecturing their kid or a spouse lecturing their spouse. I call this one the mediator. So I really had fun with that series. Joe Lombardo had encouraged doing the series. But I still continue to paint clouds. This is a friend. I got her permission to paint her photo. I call this Into the Sunset. Jim and I went to these famous gardens, the Butchart Gardens in Canada. And again, I started taking some more classes from Joe. And this one, he said, paint with anything but a brush. So this was my palette knife one. I did this as a quick little painting of somebody's yard bordering on Schiller Park downtown. And I took a design class from him about, what makes a good composition. And I really liked this one. It was called Golden Hour. And then one time I thought, I don't want to worry. I'm going to just do this painting and I'm going to think about making an abstract painting. And so this is probably the loosest painting I've done so far. And I think it was successful. And here's another series. Again, it was my kitchen counter and I had a white bowl and some eggs, and I decided to see if I could push the saturation in the whites to see if I could see more color in them. And this is a nocturne painting that Joe had us do. And Joe's a very, very fast painter, and he's more expressive. He's not that realistic. And sometimes I wonder if Joe might have been a better teacher for me to start out with, because he's not so painstaking and detailed And maybe that would have been a good counterbalance to my own perfectionism. But I still continue to paint for my own landscape photos. Again, I really like trees and light. And one time when on a Canada vacation, it was all overcast. And so I did a series of paintings from this one day. And I just noticed that I am not as intrigued with, well, there's not something with really good, strong light in it. It just doesn't interest me as much. But this so far is one of my favorite paintings that I've ever done so far. A friend of mine from high school had posted this photo that she took of these flowers on her kitchen table, and it riveted me, and I got her permission to paint it. And it is by far my most favorite painting that I've ever done. And one of my friends had a show at the OSU Faculty Club, and she recommended me to apply. And Fred Fochman was on the board, and I applied. And about a year and a half later, I had my own solo show in the fall of 2019, and I was just thrilled. And I think I had about 32 paintings there. So that for me, that was a major milestone. Another thing I found is donating paintings for fundraisers. You get asked all the time to donate paintings for worthy causes, but Sharon Weiss had recommended the Evening with Art. It's the Columbus Museum of Art Women's Board. They often, every other year, they have a fundraiser, and they have a lottery. And then there's another prestigious one to donate to is Art for Life, where Equitas Health does an auction to raise money for HIV/AIDS healthcare. And then there's also an auction, the Art of Recovery, for this Fresh Air Gallery. It's for artists in recovery from mental illness, addiction, and that's downtown. And then also, having had a show at the OSU Faculty Club, I donate there. So this was the first painting that I donated, and the woman who won my painting by lottery, her name's Kay Davenport, and she's a collector. So it's sort of a nice way of advertising to get your work in front of collectors. And then there's this couple, Jeremy on the left and Gary on the right. And Jeremy used to work at Kroger with my son, Brian, when he was in high school. And his partner, Gary, loves to get art at auctions and get a good deal. So the first painting of mine that they got was this one. And Jeremy really liked that. And then the next time there was a Art for Life auction, they made sure that they got this painting. They wanted to be the highest bidders. And then for the Fresh Air Gallery, they made sure they got this painting. And so they really liked my work. And in 2019, they invited me to their Christmas party. And they had all my paintings in their foyer, and they introduced me to their friends and family as this is, you know, one of the artists. So that was really special. But I've continued, oh yes, and this one was another for the Columbus Museum of Art. And the couple who won this painting, it turned out they're a very wealthy couple. So it was nice to have exposure to them. So I continued to paint from reference photos. Another friend, high school friend, had posted the photo, and I got her permission to paint it. And I thought it was successful, so I did a larger version. And I've done some more still lifes I've set up on my own. This was for a show at Sharon Weiss. She had all of her artists do painting on the theme of my studio. So I think this got some Fred Fochman influence with the bottles. And this was another photo from a high school friend that I saw on Facebook. And so when COVID hit in 2020, I decided to start writing my memoir about my sons and my journeys through mental illness, suicide, grief, and hope. And I spent mostly 6 months writing, but I was missing painting. And I got encouraged. I got in a couple of juried exhibitions in 20 and 21, and someone awarded me first place. And so that was encouraging. So in January, I started to return to painting. And I think there's been advantages of taking a break. It's giving me a little bit of more distance from my work. And I'm now in the direction I want to head in is to do actually more direct observation of still lifes and do light and reflection. But it's sort of a never ending goal to always continue to try to get better and improve. But hopefully I'll give myself more grace and give myself more freedom to fail and take more risks. So this is the most recent painting I took down to Sharon Weiss. This is from the Schneermeyer Gardens. And so I just want to thank you for listening and was just wondering if anybody has any questions.
Jane, I have a question for you.
Hi, sure, Don.
I know that you were in the Culture Art Center's exhibit.
Operation Monarch.
Yes,
Addiction.
yes.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you had in there and what was behind that one?
Well, I had, those cloud paintings that I told you about, where that cloud was by the memorial bench that I had for my son Eric. So I had that cloud painting and then another painting of the Sharon Woods trees and the light. So I talked about grieving my son's suicide and drug addiction and mental illness, and then how the light in this other painting, it was sort of light beyond the darkness, how those things represent struggle and pain and hope. So I came up with a paragraph to describe those paintings and those contexts.
Jane, I wanted to ask you a question about your framing. Do you do all your own framing?
Yes, I do. I buy from King of Frames. I tend to like dark frames with a gold lip, and Stephen Walker one time showed us how to frame. So I have my own little, they're like little metal points. I usually paint on board, but he showed us how to do that and how to put a dust cover on the back. So yeah, I frame all my own work.
One frame was a lot lighter. It was almost gold, all gold.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 I used to buy the gold frames, and then I heard that they're really kind of out of popularity.
Anyways, they're very nice. And I wanted to compliment you on your portraits that you do. They're really beautiful. Have you ever been commissioned for one?
No, I think people can be so picky about how someone looks. I don't know if I could ever satisfy a customer. One time I painted I did a drawing for my stepdaughter for one of her babies. I drew from a photograph, and I proudly gave it to her as a Christmas present. And I never saw it again. So I don't think she liked it very much.
I also think you get the most stressed out from doing portraits. And that's where perfectionism can really get you down, because you don't think it looks enough like that person. So it is a special person that can do a good portrait.
And when I've done drawings of different family members and I'll show it to them, they'll say, well, that doesn't look like so-and-so. So I don't know.
Jean,
Would Eric have liked the painting you did of him?
I think he might have. And his brother said to me, Mom, you captured his smirk. Eric had this little mischievous smirk.
it did look a lot like him.
But I told, when I was going to do the painting, when I first started, I showed the photograph to Stephen, and I said, I'm doing this of my son. He died by suicide, and I don't have a better photograph of him. So please don't tell me I need a better photograph to paint from.
Jane, tell me about getting permission to to paint the woman for our collaboration. It had a Columbus connection, if I remember.
Oh, I'm painting, Peg did a wonderful short story about a homeless woman who wanted to be a writer. And so I was looking online for pictures of homeless women and found some, and I found one I really liked. And it was by a Dutch photographer. And, you know, Peg and I talked about the copyright. So I contacted the photographer and asked if I had permission to paint this one photograph. And he said, sure. And I said I was doing it for an exhibit of women artists in Columbus. And so he said that he had done a series of photos of women incarcerated in Georgia. And one of these women was originally from Columbus, Ohio.
Hmm.
And so we got to talking back and forth, but he's trying to raise awareness to try to get this woman freed. He thinks she was wrongly convicted of murdering her 3-year-old child.
Oh.
And even though forensic evidence showed the child had to have died when she wasn't at home, because she pled guilty to avoid the death sentence, she'll never be released. But anyway, it's on his crusade, and he's going to have an exhibit about her, and they're writing a book together. So I'm glad I have permission to paint this woman. He's a great photographer.
What's his name?
Don Banning. And he's got a very impressive resume. And he also did this woman the photograph I want to paint, this woman, I think was from he painted a lot of people in the South who live in poverty.
Jane, I have 2 questions for you. One was, you're prolific. I mean, if you had 32 paintings for the faculty club show, that means you must be painting quite often. How often do you normally paint? And how long does it take to complete a typical painting?
Forever.
well, according to you, but
perspective. I didn't, do all these paintings, in a short amount of time. So no, I'm not prolific.
well, you haven't been painting for that long, really. I mean, some of us have been painting since high school, and your style and your work is just gorgeous, and you've gotten into such prestigious shows. I mean, I think you've done the checklist of the best shows, or the ones that only the really better artists get into. So you should really be proud of that CV list right now, because that's pretty impressive.
The one I really want to get in is the Butler Institute of American Art up in Youngstown. Has a mid-year show every year.
The Butler one?
Butler Institute of American Art. That's one Sharon Weiss said, that's a really good one to get in. And that maybe people from 25 states will enter that. And I haven't gotten in yet. And I think, oh, I'll never get in. And Sharon said, you'll get in someday. So one way I keep myself accountable for how much time I spend painting is I have in my studio like a pad of paper, and every day when I paint, I record like I'm clocking in like a time clock. I record my start time and my stop time. And at the end of the week, I total up how many hours I spent to try to help like motivate myself to paint. So I would say on a great week, I paint 18 hours a week. But normally it's more like 10 or 12.
That's a lot.
But I always want to paint more. I started painting back in January again, and then life happens. My husband's son died, and then our beloved cat, we had to put him down this past week. So, things just happen. So I have to be so intentional about painting. And I don't know if any of you are that way with your writing or your art, that it's easy to kind of have other things get in the way.
Well, do you have several going at one time since oils need lots of layers? And
Not
you just work on
usually,
one at a time?
no. But I don't paint really thickly, so it's, you know,
It dries
just-
quickly then between layers.
Yeah.
Cool.
Jane, I have a question. It seemed to me, listening to your story, which was wonderful and fascinating, thank you for sharing that, that there was a point around the time you were at the McConnell Center that everything seemed to just really come together for you as an artist. Would you say this, was there a kind of a eureka moment or a eureka period where you said, yes, this is who I am as an artist. This is what, this works. Now it's working.
I'd say it's taken me a long time. I've been painting seriously since spring of 2013. I think it's only in the last few years that I've started to kind of realize why I paint. You know, when you have to write an artist statement, you got to think long and hard about it. And then as I've gained more confidence, I think, so maybe in the last 3 or 4 years, I think it's really, in some ways, not taking classes with Stephen anymore. I had to, I think, evaluate for myself, is this painting working? What do I need to do to fix this painting? Is it done? So in a sense, it was good for me to kind of not have him taking classes with him all the time, to learn more how to stand on my own 2 feet, I think. But having other teachers like Joe Lombardo and Fred and their whole different approaches, I think that helped me find, okay, what's my own voice? What's important to me? So I'm very grateful to all these teachers. You know, each one's made their influence.
And Jane, just like you, I'm not comfortable doing plein air painting, but I do it. And I find that you still learn things from it, even if that's not your style or your genre. So I totally get why you take from different people, because you do learn something no matter what. And you can take it and leave it, or take it and apply it.
And Ellen Lyons recently said to me, I was showing her one of my paintings. I said, this isn't a very good painting. And she said, that's fine, but look at it and try to analyze it. Why isn't it a good painting? Why is it not successful? So you can learn from your mistakes as well. And I'm grateful I've have some couple of artist friends that before COVID, we started to get together and give each other critiques. And, other artists can see things you can't see. They can tell you what's working, what's not. I guess as a writer, it's having other people read what you've written, or, what an editor does for you. So having other artists give you input, I find really, really valuable.
Are there any other questions for Jane? Because I'll stop recording when we are, and then we'll go ahead and start sharing if people have different things coming up.
I had a question. I wanted to know more about the business end. You seem to have a nice website, and I wondered what program or services you use to create some of your marketing materials.
Well, I have a very technical husband, Jim, who did my website, and it's a kind of an ongoing, evolving thing. But Jim has created my website for me, so I can, easily go and say, "Can you change this or do this?" And so he was able to put in. I can mark a painting and show which ones are on view now at Sharon's gallery. So it's just, I'm grateful to have a techie husband. And Stephen Walker gave a couple of workshops. He and his wife, Evelyn, gave a couple of workshops at McConnell Art Center on the business of art.
I took that.
Any other questions for Jane?
Yes, Jane, how did you decide what gallery you wanted to get representation from? Because I know some of the galleries have an exclusivity clause.
Well, I think of the few galleries that I had visited downtown, I thought Sharon Weiss would be the best. Stephen was at Sharon Weiss, and one thing I like about Sharon, she has a front room that faces the sidewalk where she'll have her monthly exhibitions. And then the other half of the back room of the gallery, you always have something there. So some galleries, they'll just have one show at a time.
Mhm.
So one thing I like about Sharon is I always have, several paintings there. Plus, I just felt real comfortable with her.
Yeah, I like her gallery too.
So, I think it's just great advertising, too, to be in a gallery. For me, that was a big milestone.
Well,
And
I'm-
then,
oh,
some people like Stephen Walker and Dan Nepper, they're in 8 galleries around the country, but I think very few people make a living off their art like Dan and Stephen.
True. Thank you, Jane, so much for everything.
That's really nice.
You've set the bar really high now. I feel sorry for our next
Thank you, Jane.
speaker, but thank you so much. And we've learned so much. And I really appreciate that you talked about perfectionism, because no matter what our medium is, I think we all come across that. And sometimes we're harder on ourselves than we need to be. And that's why it's great to be in a group like this, because we can share that kind of stuff and help each other to get through it, because we've all been there. So again, thank you so much. That was
You're
really awesome.
Thanks for coming.
And I'm gonna
It was lovely. Just
I'm
wonderful.
gonna